Hello, my beautiful babies. Welcome to the Little Wonder Stories.
Hello, Little Wonder family. I hope you all are doing awesome. I'm back with a new interesting story just for my tiny friends. So let's dive into this.
Beauty and the Beast. Once upon a time, a merchant came back from a long journey. It was dark and very cold, and he was soon lost. He came to a castle. There was an open door, and he went inside. "Hello, hello," he called. There was no one there. A cozy fire was burning in the fireplace, and yummy food was on the table. He started eating, and hoped he would see the person who owned the castle, so he could thank them. After he had eaten, he lay down on a comfy couch. Then, with a big yawn, he was soon fast asleep. It was morning when he woke up. "Hello, hello," he called, but no one answered. He went out into the garden. It was sunny and warm, although it was winter time outside the castle. There were flowers growing everywhere he looked. He picked a rose for his daughter, Beauty. She was a very kind girl and very beautiful. Suddenly, he heard a very angry and frightening voice.
"How dare you pick my flowers? You stayed in my castle last night. Is this how you thank me?"
The merchant turned around, and there stood a big, ugly, and frightening beast, with big, sharp teeth and a hairy face.
"What will you do to make up for stealing my rose?"
asked the beast. The merchant was very frightened and said, I picked it for my lovely daughter Beauty, and I didn't think anyone would mind." The beast was still angry and said,
"That is no excuse."
"I'm really sorry," said the merchant.
"Bring your daughter here, and I might forgive you," said the beast.
The merchant set off home as fast as he could. He told Beauty about the castle and the beast. She said,
"Of course I'll come back with you, Father."
Back at the castle, they went into the room where he had stayed the night. A warm fire was burning in the fireplace, and some yummy food on the table, just like before. As they ate their meal, heavy footsteps came near. The ugly beast came into the room, and Beauty was very frightened. But she smiled and said,
"Good evening, Beast."
The beast smiled back and said,
"Good evening. You must be Beauty."
Then the beast said to the merchant,
"Your daughter is so beautiful that she lights up my old castle. Please let her stay here for a while. She will be very safe here."
That night, in her cozy bed, Beauty had a funny dream about a talking clock and a candlestick that said,
"Hello."
She even dreamt that there was a nice teapot lady who was kind to her. Then, in her dream, she thought she heard the teapot lady say,
"Beauty, you are loved by a handsome prince. Try to find him, and you will be very happy together."
When Beauty woke up, she laughed when she remembered the talking clock and the kind teapot. That evening, after supper, the beast came into the room. She was still a bit frightened, but all the beast said was,
"Good evening, Beauty."
Then the beast handed her a rose.
"This came from my garden," he said.
"Oh, good evening, Beast."
She smiled.
"Thank you. What a lovely flower."
"Good night, then, Beauty,"
said the beast, a bit sadly. The next evening after supper, the beast appeared and handed her a book to read.
"I think you will like this story, Beauty. I loved it," he said.
Thank you so much,
said Beauty.
you are very kind.
Good night, then,
Said the Beast, and off he went.
He can't help being a bit ugly, but he's really very gentle and kind inside.
Thought Beauty.
I'm not afraid of him any more, and I've grown to like him a lot. It's what's inside that really matters.
Beauty loved looking in the beautiful gardens and hearing all the birds singing in the trees. One day in the garden, she found an envelope with her name on it. Inside was another note which said,
Dear Beauty, please pick all the flowers you want.
One evening, Beauty waited for the Beast to come to her at supper time, as he usually did. But he didn't appear. She got worried and looked everywhere in the castle, but there was no sign of him. Although it was getting a bit dark, she went out into the garden. She looked all around, but still no sign of the Beast. She was getting very worried by now. Then, at the far edge of the garden, she saw a cave.
I wonder if he's in there.
She thought to herself. She went in, and there was the Beast lying on the ground, with a great big bump on his head, and his cheeks had tears running down them. He looked like he was asleep, and she stroked his head. He didn't move, or even open his eyes. She kissed his forehead.
Oh, poor dear Beast.
She thought to herself. Then the Beast opened his eyes.
Oh, I must have banged my head coming into the cave,
Said the Beast.
I do love you, after all.
Said Beauty.
Oh, Beauty, will you marry me?
Asked the Beast.
Yes, dear Beast.
She answered. Suddenly, the cave where Beast had changed into a handsome prince with a great big smile on his face. He said, A wicked witch put a spell on me to turn me into a beast. But you said you loved me, and now the spell is broken. As they went back into the castle, Beauty noticed a teapot like the one in her dream. And just for a moment, she thought the teapot winked at her. Soon they were married, and Beauty and the prince lived happily ever after. The end.
Little Wonder family, I hope you all are doing awesome. I'm back with a new interesting story just for my tiny friends. So let's dive into this.
Story of Cinderella. There was, many years ago, a gentleman who had a charming lady for his wife. They had one daughter only who was very dutiful to her parents. But while she was still very young, her mama died to the grief of her husband and daughter. After a time, the little girl's papa married another lady. Now this lady was proud and haughty, and had two grown-up daughters as disagreeable as herself. So the poor girl found everything at home changed for the worse, but she bore all her troubles with patience, not even complaining to her father, and in spite of her hard toil, she grew more lovely in face and figure every year. Now, the king's son gave a grand ball, and all persons of quality were invited to it. Our two young ladies were not overlooked. Nothing was now talked of but the rich dresses they were to wear. At last, the happy day arrived. The two proud sisters set off in high spirits. Cinderella followed them with her eyes until the coach was out of sight. She then began to cry bitterly. While she was sobbing, her godmother, who was a fairy, appeared before her. Cinderella, said the fairy, I am your godmother, and for the sake of your dear mama, I am come to cheer you up. So dry your tears. You shall go to the grand ball tonight, but you must do just as I bid you. Go into the garden and bring me a pumpkin. Cinderella brought the finest that was there. Her godmother scooped it out very quickly and then struck it with her wand, upon which it was changed into a beautiful coach. Afterwards, the old lady peeped into the mouse trap, where she found 6 mice. She tapped them lightly with her wand, and each mouse became a fine horse. The rat trap contained 2 large rats. One of these she turned into a coachman, and the other into a postilion. The old lady then told Cinderella to go into the garden and seek for half a dozen lizards. These she changed into 6 footmen, dressed in the gayest livery. When all these things had been done, the kind godmother, touching her with her wand, changed her worn-out clothes into a beautiful ball dress embroidered with pearls and silver. She then gave her a pair of glass slippers. That is, they were woven of the most delicate spun glass, fine as the web of a spider. When Cinderella was thus attired, her godmother made her get into her splendid coach, giving her a caution to leave the ball before the clock struck 12. On her arrival, her beauty struck everybody with wonder. The gallant prince gave her a courteous welcome and led her into the ballroom, and the king and queen were as much enchanted with her as the prince conducted her to the supper table and was too much occupied in waiting upon her to partake of anything himself. While seated, Cinderella heard the clock strike 11:15. She rose to leave, the prince pressing her to accept an invitation for the ball on the following evening. On reaching home, her godmother praised her for being so punctual and agreed to let her go to the next night's ball. Although she seemed to be tired, her sisters, instead of showing pity, teased her with glowing accounts of the splendid scene they had just left, and spoke particularly of the beautiful princess. Cinderella was delighted to hear all this, and asked them the name of the princess, but they replied nobody knew her. So much did they say in praise of the lady, that Cinderella expressed a desire to go to the next ball, to see the princess, but this only served to bring out their dislike of poor Cinderella still more, and they would not lend her the meanest of their dresses. The next evening, the 2 sisters went to the ball, and Cinderella also, who was still more splendidly dressed than before. Her enjoyment was even greater than at the first ball, and she was so occupied with the prince's tender sayings that she was not so quick in marking the progress of time. To her alarm, she heard the clock strike 12. She fled from the ballroom, but in a moment the coach changed again to a pumpkin, the horses to mice, the coachman and postilion to rats, the footman to lizards, and Cinderella's beautiful dress to her old shabby clothes. In her haste, she dropped one of her glass slippers and reached home, out of breath, with none of her godmother's fairy gifts but one glass slipper. When her sisters arrived after the ball, they spoke in terms of rapture of the unknown princess, and told Cinderella about the little glass slipper she had dropped, and how the prince picked it up. It was evident to all the court that the prince was determined, if possible, to find out the owner of the slipper, and a few days afterwards, a royal herald proclaimed that the king's son would marry her whose foot the glass slipper should be found exactly to fit. This proclamation caused a great sensation. Ladies of all ranks were permitted to make a trial of the slipper, but it was of no use. Cinderella now said, "Let me try, perhaps it may fit me." It slipped on in a moment. Great was the vexation of the 2 sisters at this, but what was their astonishment when Cinderella took the fellow slipper out of her pocket. At that moment the godmother appeared, and touched Cinderella's clothes with her wand. Her sisters then saw that she was the beautiful lady they had met at the ball, and throwing themselves at her feet, craved her forgiveness. A short time after, she was married to the prince, to the intense gratification of the whole court. The end.
Hello, Little Wonder family. I hope you all are doing awesome. I'm back with a new interesting story just for my tiny friends. So let's dive into this.
Sleeping Beauty. Once upon a time, the king and queen in a faraway land had a little baby girl. They were so happy, and all the bells in the land rang with joy. Fairies from all over the kingdom were invited to a grand party to celebrate. The fairies brought beautiful presents and blessed the little princess that she would grow up to be kind and helpful. But a wicked old witch came to the palace.
On your 16th birthday, you shall prick your finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel and vanish forever,
The witch screamed. Everyone was really shocked, but a clever young fairy said,
I can't stop the evil witch's curse, but I'll try to help. If the princess does touch a spindle, she won't vanish, but she will fall into a deep sleep for 100 years. She will only be woken up by the kiss of a prince who loves her.
The king and the queen were so worried for their dear daughter that they ordered all the spinning wheels of the kingdom to be broken up and burned. But they didn't know that one spinning wheel was left. They wanted to be extra sure the princess would be safe. They asked the fairy, along with 2 other fairies, to take their precious baby far away. They would look after her in their little cottage deep in the woods until after her 16th birthday. Then it would be safe to bring her back to the castle. The princess grew up not knowing anyone else except the 3 fairies. They were so much fun, and she called the 3 of them her aunties. She made friends with lots of the animals in the forest near the cottage. She loved to play with the birds and the deer, the rabbits, and even the little mice. From the time she was tiny, she was told she must not go too far away from the cottage. She didn't mind. There were plenty of places for her to play. The princess had grown to be a lovely, kind young girl. On her 16th birthday, she was taken back to the castle. As you can imagine, the king and queen were so happy to see her, and she was very happy to see them too. After she had rested from her long journey, she thought she would have a look around the castle. She found a secret room at the very top of the castle towers. Then she saw an old woman bent over a spinning wheel. "Please, can I have a try at that?" she asked politely. But as soon as she touched the needle of the spindle, she fell to the ground in a very deep sleep. The witch's spell had come true. The king and queen were very unhappy now and ordered the servants to take her to the grand room where she would lie for many years. The whole kingdom was sad for Sleeping Beauty. The fairy watched all this. She waved her magic wand and said, "Let the whole kingdom fall asleep with the princess, so when she is woken by her prince, she won't be alone." The moment she said all this, all the people and animals in the kingdom fell asleep just where they were. Everything just stopped. As the years passed by, a great thick forest grew up around the palace, and the whole kingdom was hidden. 100 years later, a handsome prince was riding through the forest, and he found the strange kingdom. While he explored the old castle, he was amazed to find the princess lying fast asleep. The minute he saw her, he fell in love with her. "I wonder who she is. How gentle and peaceful she looks," he thought to himself. He leaned down and kissed her hand. Instantly, the spell was lifted and she blinked her eyes awake. Then all the other people in the castle woke up too. Then everyone in the whole kingdom woke up. All the people started to do what they'd been doing when they had fallen asleep 100 years before. The thorns and vines around the castle just melted away. The king and queen were so very happy, and so was everyone in the whole kingdom. Once again, all the bells in the land were rung with joy. The prince and princess were soon married, and they lived happily ever after. The end.
Hello, Little Wonder family. I hope you all are doing awesome. I'm back with a new interesting story just for my tiny friends. So let's dive into this.
Snow White and Red Rose. Once upon a time, a mother and her 2 girls lived in a pretty cottage near the forest. In the garden was a red rose bush and a white rose bush. That was funny, because one girl had red hair and the other was fair. And guess what? The girls were called Snow White and Red Rose. Snow White was gentle and quiet. Red Rose loved to run outside chasing butterflies. They often went into the forest to play with all the little animals that trusted them and knew they were kind. One cold winter evening, the family was sitting around a lovely warm fire. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The mother said, "Quick, someone must need shelter from the cold. Let them in." Red Rose opened the door, but she got a big surprise. It wasn't a person standing there, but a great big bear. Red Rose screamed, but the bear smiled and said,
I mean no harm. I'm very cold. Please, can I have a place to rest my head?
Their mother made him some herbal tea to warm him up. Snow White and Red Rose wiped the snow off his fur. The bear laughed.
Oh, that tickles.
Soon they were all laughing. They wrapped the bear up in a blanket, and they all sat in front of the fire and were cozy and warm. The bear stayed for the rest of the winter. He helped with housework and gave the sisters piggyback rides around the snow-filled woods. When springtime came, the bear said,
Now I must say goodbye, and thank you for being so kind.
"Oh, where are you going, dear bear?" asked Snow White.
I must go into the forest and guard my treasure from the wicked woodland elves. In the winter, they stay underground, but now the weather is warmer, out they will come to steal it away from me. They were all sorry to see him go, and waved goodbye. A few days later, the girls were walking by the river. They heard some yelps, so they hurried over to see what it was. An elf was on the riverbank with his beard dipped in the water. Then they looked, and they could see that a crab was clinging onto the end of it. Red Rose and Snow White couldn't stop laughing.
"Don't just stand there, help me,"
said the elf. Both girls pulled on his beard, but they couldn't pull it free. Red Rose got out a pair of scissors and snipped the end of the elf's beard. The crab scuttled off with a piece of the elf's beard clutched in its claw.
"You cut my precious beard,"
the elf shouted.
"I'll get you for this."
He picked up his sack and hurried off into the forest. "Such a rude and angry little man," Snow White laughed. "We should have just left him there," Red Rose grinned. On their way home, they found a handsome young man who seemed to be asleep. He had a great big bruise on his forehead. The girls tried to gently wake him up. He opened his eyes and looked at Red Rose.
I must be dreaming. You look like an angel, he cried.
Red Rose blushed.
How did you get that nasty bruise on your head?
That rude old elf put a spell on me and stole my gems.
Just then, their old friend the bear appeared. The girls ran up and gave him a great big hug.
Hello there,
He smiled at them and said,
Andrew. These are the kind sisters I told you about. They helped me and saved me from freezing last winter.
Thank you for helping my brother. Andrew smiled at them. Brother? Asked Red Rose. Suddenly, the elf appeared with his sack over his shoulder. Hand me back my gems at once. Andrew jumped to his feet and pulled out a sword.
Think you can beat me? Ha ha ha!
The elf laughed.
And you?
He pointed to the bear.
You like being a bear?
What's going on? Red Rose asked. She was very confused. He stole our gems and turned my brother into a bear, Andrew said. Right, give back their gems at once, Red Rose said sternly to the elf.
Never!
The elf shouted.
Beard power!
He started growing higher and higher until he was 8 feet tall and towered over them.
No one can beat me!
The elf laughed.
I'm the tallest and the strongest!
Red Rose grabbed Andrew's sword, ran towards the elf, jumped up and sliced off most of his beard. Elf suddenly started to shrink, smaller and smaller and smaller, until he was tiny.
How dare you!
He squeaked out,
I'll get you for this, just you wait!
and he ran off into the woods. The bear suddenly turned into a young man with a big smile on his face. I am Gareth, a king's son, he said. The elf put a spell on me to steal my treasures. I had to live as a bear until you broke the spell by cutting off his beard. Thank you. Well, they all became the very best of friends and lived happily ever after. The end.
Hello, Little Wonder family. I hope you all are doing awesome. I'm back with a new interesting story just for my tiny friends. So let's dive into this.
The Princess and the Pea. In a land far, far away, there was a glorious kingdom. In the kingdom stood a great castle, and inside the castle lived a handsome prince. The prince was sad. He longed for a true princess to share his castle and kingdom, but he couldn't find one. This was not because there was a lack of princesses. In fact, the kingdom was full of fair maidens, all claiming to be princesses. The prince scoured the kingdom, meeting every one of these so-called princesses. But he returned sad and empty-handed. It's impossible to tell whether these are true princesses, he said to his father, the king.
You must be patient, my son.
You will know when you know, said the king with a knowing smile. The prince smiled back, then went to his chamber. That evening, a huge storm came. Thunder clapped, lightning flashed, and the rain clattered down on the castle roof like the sound of 1,000 horses charging into battle. Suddenly came a loud knock at the castle door. The king put on his robe and opened the door to find a cold, soggy young lady standing in front of him.
I'm a true princess, she said. Please can I have some dry clothes and a bed for the night?
The king let her in.
She says she's a true princess,
said the king to the old queen mother. The Queen Mother didn't say a word. Instead, she thought to herself,
We'll soon see about that.
she handed the princess a nightgown and said,
Put this on, dear, while I prepare your chamber.
The Queen Mother began preparing the chamber, but in a very peculiar way. First, she took the covers, sheets, and mattress off the bed. Then she placed a single garden pea on the bedstead. And then she laid 20 mattresses on top of the pea, taking care to separate each layer with a soft eider-down quilt. After this, she replaced the bedclothes on the top mattress and said to the princess,
Your chamber is ready.
The bed was now so high off the ground that the princess needed to climb a ladder to get into the bed. So the princess climbed up the ladder, got under the covers, and blew out her candle. At breakfast the next morning, the Queen Mother turned to the princess and asked,
My dear princess, how did you sleep?
Oh, not at all well, said the princess. I mean to say, I'm extremely grateful for your kindness in putting me up for the night, but there seemed to be something ever so hard and uncomfortable under my mattress. I didn't sleep a wink.
My,
Replied the Queen Mother.
is that so?
The Queen Mother turned to the prince and said,
I believe we have found your true princess, for none but a true princess possesses such a delicate sense to feel a single pea through 20 mattresses and 20 of my finest quilts. You must wed immediately.
The prince was overjoyed. He turned to the princess and said, Dear princess, would you do me the great honour of becoming my wife? She blushed, then taking a moment to finish a mouthful of cereal, said, On one condition. Anything, replied the prince. She looked at the prince with a cheeky grin and said, That you promise, dear prince, that from this day forward, any pea that should enter this castle is simply for eating and not for sleeping upon. The prince looked back at her, chuckled, and said, I promise. The end.